So Zen 5 launched a couple of weeks ago, and ever since then, AMD has been trying to explain away a couple of discrepancies that there have been between their numbers that they show to the public and reviewers and what reviewers like us actually achieved with the 9000 series. All of that basically culminated directly into a post that pointed towards an upcoming version of Windows incorporating some big optimizations for Ryzen CPUs. And because of that, we started doing some spot checking, comparing our original gaming benchmarks that were run on 23H2 to the upcoming 24H2 update. And the results, they were absolutely shocking, but not in the way that you might expect, because in a lot of ways, they completely busted some unrealistically high expectations that we had about this transition. And this whole thing is a story that I just needed to tell. Anyways, the short version of the story is that 24H2 will be introducing an evolved version of AMD's branch prediction algorithm, which could increase performance of Zen 3, Zen 4, and the new Zen 5 CPUs in some games and a few applications. This isn't a silver bullet for the Ryzen 9000 series though, since it can affect CPUs as far back as the 5000 series, and it's excessively app dependent. Anyways, about those results on a clean install of Windows, the second we started seeing them on a 9900X, well, it looked like it was time to put down the fire extinguishers over at AMD. Some titles were seeing massive uplifts, even way beyond what was promised. For example, they said we should see about 7% in Cyberpunk, but we saw almost triple that. So obviously, there's something going on here, because if this was the case, AMD would be shouting it from the freaking rooftops. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, because this is where things got really weird. We installed the same version of Windows on an Intel 14th gen system and also got significant frame rate boosts in certain games. Granted, in some situations, it's a lot less than the comparative uplift AMD's seeing, but let's just pause here for a second to take this all in. Most of the conversation around this upcoming Windows version revolved around AMD's exclusive branch prediction. So why are we now seeing Intel chips also affected? So at that point, we decided to do a very deep dive into benchmarking, because it's big news, right? You can now download more performance in the form of a Windows update for both Intel and AMD CPUs. But look, I have to pump the brakes here a little bit, because something else went on and we have to discuss it. And that is the distinct difference in the way a mainline version of Windows is installed via clean install versus the release preview of 24H2. Let me make this clear right away. We always test with new installs of Windows for every platform and always have a list of system checks we do to make sure everyone is as identical as possible. One of those checks is making sure memory integrity is enabled. This used to be one of a few settings in VBS, and in the mainline versions of Windows, it's always on by default. But in 24H2, we actually found that it was off after a fresh install. And to be honest with you, we actually missed this entirely in our rush to validate some of the results. It was an honest mistake that anybody could have made through assumption that this setting was simply on by default. It was luckily caught before we made any conclusions whatsoever. And this actually highlights why we have such a stringent process internally to make sure any results that we have been validated over and over again. Now you might think this little memory integrity toggle is a small thing in the grand scheme of things, but it's actually not. Ever since VBS was introduced, this memory integrity toggle has been known, at least when it's disabled, to potentially increase frame rates in certain games. And toggling that switch to the on position in our 9900X allowed us to at least align settings between 24H2 and 23H2. It also isolates AMD's branch prediction algorithm, highlighting what it alone can do in some games. Overall, it does something, I guess, but over 16 separate games, it's about 3% on 24H2. That's nothing close to the 7% or thereabouts we're seeing with the cumulative effect of memory integrity being turned off alongside AMD's branch prediction. I mean, there are still some notable benefits, especially in games that are particularly CPU bound. So when placed on completely equal footing, a system with AMD's revised branch prediction can have a positive impact if you play a game that uses its specific code path. AMD users, well, you have a win. It just wasn't the one you were expecting before Zen 5's launch. Meanwhile, quite a few others don't see any difference whatsoever, likely due to these titles being less reliant on CPU horsepower. I'm willing to bet most people will actually find themselves in this situation since they won't be using an RTX 4090, so some emphasis would be put on the GPU being the bottleneck rather than the processor stepping in. Yes, even at 1080p. Finally, in a few titles, there's a slight performance regression versus the current mainline version of Windows 11. That's to be expected since there's some additional bloat in 24H2 that might be affecting things. Plus, you have to remember, this is a preview build, so it isn't final yet, and that could contribute to some of the variability that you're seeing here. So at this point in time, you might be thinking, this is where the story ends. But it actually doesn't, because there's another wrinkle in the fabric here, and that is the fact that Microsoft just rolled out a very specific update for 23H2 that allows AMD's branch prediction to work on this slightly older version of Windows and not the preview build. And that's going to be big news because it allows for some really interesting apples to apples comparison versus all the other benchmarks that you've already seen here. And I know we're about to throw a bunch of information at you, so I'm going to try to make things as easy to understand as possible. We're going to break these results into 4 distinct categories between Windows 11, 23H2, and 24H2. First of all, we have the latest version of 23H2 with all the current required updates, along with the results for that same version of Windows, but with the KB 5041587, try and say that a few times, update installed. And that enables AMD's branch prediction coding. There's also 2 results using the 24H2 branch, one with memory integrity enabled and the other with it disabled. So as we go through these results, the story is pretty clear. First of all, the latest version of 23H2, well, it comes with memory integrity enabled out of the box, while the 24H2 preview simply doesn't. So comparing fresh installs of each while assuming it was automatically enabled almost led to some completely unrealistic expectations on our part. And you can see why here. The results are just spectacular in a lot of cases. Luckily, someone decided to roll out AMD's branch prediction optimizations into that optional update for 23H2. It actually claws back most of the performance increases we are seeing with the cumulative benefits of branch prediction alongside disabled memory integrity. As a matter of fact, due to that release preview's excess baggage, there's a few times when it gets outperformed by the current version of Windows with the update applied. And make no mistake about it, this is really, really good news for AMD users. They get a clear and easy path to potentially increasing their processor's capabilities in gaming, and I'm sure other lightly threaded apps too. Sometimes it's just a small bump or nothing at all. There's a pretty big boost for both averages and 1% lows. More importantly, we didn't see a single area this update actually hurt performance, and don't forget, it doesn't require you to upgrade to 24H2, which is something you might not actually want to do. So where does this all leave us? And I think you guys are in the same position as the whole team here. We've been on this roller coaster of emotions ever since Zen 5 launched, from disappointment to expectation to hoping that something would actually fix its performance. And I think this 24H2 story blends into that whole narrative pretty well, because if we would have just tested both out of the box, we would have assumed that there was these massive performance increases. Instead, we found that a simple setting could have completely messed up our results, and we caught it in time. But luckily, there's a redemption story here, and that is this new update for 23H2. In the end, I mean, sure, we didn't see double-digit frame rate boosts from this update. It hovered around 5% give or take when averaged out across 16 titles, with some benefiting a heck of a lot more than others. You need to use the apples to oranges comparison of memory integrity on versus off to get anywhere close to those double digits. Though admittedly, our game selection, resolution, in-game settings, benchmark sequence, and all sorts of other things don't exactly mirror anyone else's, so I'm sure some people will see higher or lower impacts from this update. But I have to hand it to everyone here on the team, because we've pulled some crazy hours in order to get a lot of these numbers and in order to validate them. And in all my years, I've been in this industry for 15 years now, this actually has to be the, or at least one of the most challenging launches I've ever been through. It just doesn't matter what it is. Questions about performance, the validity of what AMD presented to the press as well as potential buyers, this branch prediction update somehow not being in place for Zen 5 launch, X870E motherboards being MIA at launch, the list goes on. This is all just so unbelievably damaging to AMD's reputation. So ultimately, the fact that this performance can be downloaded with a simple Windows update should be celebrated by everybody. It doesn't matter if you're an AMD user or an Intel user. This is good stuff, but it's sort of hiding this darker fact that somewhere, somehow at AMD, the left hand just simply isn't talking to the right hand. Nothing seems to be aligning right now, especially on this Ryzen 9000 series launch. And that's not good for anybody, guys. And I'm gonna leave this video at that because we have a lot of re-benchmarking to do here, because this update, it does fundamentally change the playing field sort of right before Intel's Arrow Lake launches. Anyways, I'm Mike with Hardware Canucks. I'm gonna see you in the next one. Have a great day.